No, no, we need.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do I need to speak here?
Yes, yes.
Closer?
Like a singer.
Thank you. Welcome to this panel. This is a panel on scientific publishing entitled How to Get Your Work Published in a Scientific Journal. I've already mentioned, my name is Dana Niculescu. I am a publisher with Elsevier. I have invited for this panel 5 of the editors of some of the Elsevier journals in energy. I would like to introduce, of course you already know them, I'm sure, but I would like to introduce Professor Anna Maria Bonamano from the University of Naples, Professor Yanis Yeropoulos from the University of Southampton, Professor Soteris Kalogiru from Cyprus University of Technology, Professor Henrik Lund from Aalborg University, and Professor Natasha Markowska from the Macedonian Academy of Sciences and Arts. The first topic of the panel is, as you can see, how to choose the right journal for your publication. And it will be presented by Ana Maria Bonomano. She's the senior editor of Energy Reports, as well as associate editor of another set of Elsevier journals.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. And I'm very happy to be here for this panel. And I would like to thank Dana and Neven for inviting me to share some tips and recommendations with young authors, especially for young authors, on how to choose the right journal for your publication. Just a second. Okay, the slide is fine. We know that from our experience as editor, also as authors, we know that we want to publish our paper in high-impact journal papers, journals. And first of all, we need and we want this journal to be read by a lot of people, so the high community which is large enough to increase the impact of our research, our publication. But most of the time, our papers are not submitted to the right journals because we know from our records, for example, for energy reports, 1 out of 2 papers submitted to the journal are desk rejected. So this means that 50% of paper submission are never reach the under review status. And one of the reasons because this happens is because papers are most of the time out of scope. So this means that authors use criteria for selecting the journals, which are not the complete criteria. They follow some, I included here, recommendations that are not enough sometimes to get to see our paper, your paper, in the right journal. So most of the time, authors, and so you young authors especially, and we did it before in our past, selected the journal according to, first of all, the publisher reputation, which is one of the most important criterion, and other criteria which are used to select the publication, so the journal, to select the journal is the impact factor and the site score, because we want our paper to be published on a journal which suggests that in the future our submission, our paper will reach high number of citations, and so a huge impact. But sometimes this is not selecting the journal just because of this is not the right choice. And sometimes we want to select the journal according to the acceptance rate and the review time. We want the acceptance rate to be high because we want to give to our publication the chance to be published. We consider review time as another criterion. So the shorter the review time, the best is, especially for young authors, is for PhD students. This is something that, I mean, these criteria, sometimes they don't go in the same direction, but they are opposite. They are opposite goals. Most of the time, this paper, in any case, even if we select the journal according to this criteria, they are rejected. And most of the time, because they don't fit the journal. So in my opinion, from my experience, one of the main aspects, the most important criterion to select, to use for selected journal is to consider and to read. So please read carefully the aim or scope of the journal. About the aim or scope of the journal, I will give you some example later, but you have to consider that if the aim or scope of your publication doesn't fit the aim or scope of the journal, even if your paper is submitted, it doesn't ensure you to get high number of citations and to be cited, and also to get the impact that probably your paper deserves. So first of all, you have to read the aim or scope of the journal, and second, something that I would like to suggest to underline and to stress is to consider the journal readership. Who is going to read your paper? Who is going to read your paper and who's going to cite your paper? How can we know who is going to be the potential reader of your paper? We can choose several options. We can find which are the most downloaded paper of a journal, we can find for the most cited paper of a journal, and there are on the journal page there are options to check this aspect. And you don't need to go back in time. I mean, science move on very fast and things change, and we know that a topic that was very relevant and very significant 5 years ago, it could be not significant at all now. So please read check who read the paper or the journal, but don't go too far in the past. And another aspect of another criterion to select a journal is to consider the field of accepted papers. What I mean, we need to see which are the hot topics of the journal. So sometimes we publish paper on high impact factor journals, and sometimes these papers they are not included in the hot topics, and we don't get the right number of citations. It happened to me. I published, for example, recently on energy a paper which was very, in my opinion, very good paper. I didn't get a lot of citation because it was more focused on electricity, while energy is more focused on thermal energy. No? So this aspect must be considered when we select a journal, and we need to carefully take into account all these criteria, not only the impact factor, not only the site score, or the acceptance rate and the review time. In this slide, just as an example, there is the first page of energy reports. So the journal I serve as a senior editor, and is highlighted here the Hemoscope. You can find it a similar page for every journal of the Elsevier platform. And in energy reports, for all journals, the Hemoscope is defined by the editor-in-chief, Professor Nelson Fumo in this case. And I would like to underline that in this case, we also have on the web page the Hemoscope of the submission, which need to be clearly defined. But why the Hemoscope need to be clearly defined? Because the editor must easily check if the Hemoscope of your submission fits the Hemoscope of the journal. If this does happen, the paper will be rejected 100%. So, and when you get a paper rejection, there is also another impact, because you need to, first of all, the review process become large. I mean, the time of review process increases. You should, sometimes we don't do it, you don't do it, we don't do it. You should rework your paper to fit the journal aims of another publication or another journal. So it's good, and it's good that we read the journal, the Hemoscope, and we do it carefully. An example is reported here for you. I included only energy reports, renewable energy, and energy conversion and management among the portfolio of journal, Elsevier journal focused on energy, and only because I'm in the editorial board of this journal. And in a very, very quick example for you, especially for PhD students, if you have a submission which is focused on a single technology, for sure you cannot submit it on energy reports, even if it has a high acceptance rate, if it is a good impact factor, and maybe a review time which is low. Why? Because the journal covers all aspects of energy, with the exception of nuclear mining and single technologies. And if your technology is also, let's say, it uses fossil fuel, you cannot even publish it on renewable energy. This time this is easy, because renewable is in the title, so you can find it out very easily. But it's not always like this. And in this case, your submission must fit much better the journal energy conversion and management among those that I selected. So when you publish a paper, please read carefully the Hemoscope. You can compare the Hemoscope the way I did, but you can also use and exploit, take advantage of other tools which are provided by Elsevier. One of these tools is the Journal Finder. The Journal Finder tools allows you to easily check, probably by considering the algorithm which is behind this tool, probably it takes into account the same criteria that I mentioned before. So the Hemoscope, the readership of the journal, the citation, the impact, and how it works. You can see from this page there are several options that you can consider for the selection of your journal. So you can enter the title of your your paper, the tentative title, so the draft of your abstract. You can include the keywords, and you can also include the field of research of your paper. And plus, in addition to this, you can also select some other option, which I recommend to use very carefully. And one of these is, for example, the impact factor. I selected like the minimum impact factor of 3 for the journal, and a maximum time to first decision to up to 30 weeks for the journal for this search. And the tool, the results of the tool is a list of journals which are suitable for your publication. So you can get several, of course, they are sorted by relevance with your paper, with especially with the option that you selected. By starting from this, you can go from, you can check for each of these journals which is the most suitable for you, but you start from a basis which is much more important than which is useful with respect to the only criteria or impact of the journal that we are used to consider. And just to recap what is important for me from my experience as editor and from my experience as particular as author, to what we need to do, what we have to consider when we need to select a journal. First of all, the reputation of the publisher, which is very, very important, because the number of journals, especially in energy, in this sector, is increasing with time. So the portfolio is richer and richer with time. And we need to consider the reputation of the journal, so the coverage of the reputation of the publisher and the coverage of the journal, if it is indexed by Scopus, by ISI, because this increases the chance of our paper to be read by a high number of people, a number of scientists. We need to consider the journal impact and relevance, of course, because we already said it. And please, and I would like to underline this part, we need for sure to take into account the aim and scope and the journal readership of the tool, of our journal. And this can for sure, potentially it will increase the impact of our paper or our research, and indirectly it will increase the impact of our career. Thank you very much for now, so I don't have to add anything more about this topic, and I will be happy to reply to your question later.
Are there questions? Perfect, yes. Then we can move on to the next presentation by Professor Yannis Ieropoulou. He's here. He is the Editor-in-Chief of Sustainable Energy Technologies and Assessment. And he will talk about indeed ways to succeed in scientific publishing, and specifically at what editors are looking at when receiving a submission.
Thank you, Dana. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Following on from the wonderful presentation in terms of what we as authors would be looking for when publishing, what I'll be talking about from the point of view of our journal is what we are looking for in terms of scientific papers and what elements we look for when we talk about publishing scientific research. So I tried to keep this succinct as my main message. So I've split this into primary and secondary criteria just to show you from an editor's point of view what we kind of try to look for when papers are coming in, and what we then decide based on these criteria. So first and foremost is the novelty in the concept of the work carried out. It sounds kind of stating the obvious, but in many cases there are manuscripts that simply report on incremental research, and that's something that it does have a place in the public domain, but not when we're looking to publish breakthrough science and addressing real world problems. Clear explanation of where the work sits within the scientific community. So this implies the kind of thorough literature review when putting the manuscript into the journal. because that then helps the editors understand the significance of the work and how that kind of sits with the rest of the community. As already mentioned, to be within the scope of the journal, that's a clear criterion. And then the statement of author contribution, which I will leave the ethics dimension of that to my esteemed colleague, Professor Caloiro. And when we think about review papers, and we have seen this, review papers may have a list or a catalog of techniques or systems or technologies included in a very long manuscript, but very, very little critique, which is the most valuable element of a review paper. In other words, highlighting the pros and cons and how those technologies, when compared, they can offer value in certain fields or not. So just to expand a little bit on that, the novelty of the work, it has to bring new knowledge to the field. And that is the whole essence of a new manuscript submitted to a journal for the readership. And this is not, as I mentioned before, not often the case. Incremental research, as mentioned, can lead to advances in a specific technological field, but when it's incremental and it's the impact of that or the breakthrough is not sufficient, then that perhaps is not a scientific publication. That could be a technical report that could go somewhere in the public domain. When it comes to the mechanics of the manuscripts coming in, then the editor is looking at the cover letter, and that's where the authors have to explain very clearly what the novelty is, what the breakthrough is, and include that in the introduction for the reviewers and the readership, of course. Secondary criteria: succinctness, applying précis to our manuscripts. The advice here is to avoid clutter and make use of supporting information appendices. That's what they're there for. The manuscript should convey the message very clearly and very succinctly, I repeat myself, but avoid including all the data, all the graphs, all the equations that have been used to get to those results. Those are important and they can be there for further reading, but the main manuscript should have the main message. There we go. We are, as an international journal, we use the international language, and English is the language of written communication. So the level of quality has to be quite high so that people can understand. And then the narrative flow. And I'd like to stand a little bit on that, because narrative flow is quite key for readers. When you're reading something, just imagine like a newspaper article or some book. It's how that flows from a narrative perspective that draws us to finish something very quickly and understand it. It's the same with a scientific paper. We are reporting science, so it will have technical terminology, but it still needs to have a flow so that the reader can start and finish and understand what was reported in that manuscript. And the bullet points I've put there, the specialist will be able to replicate the work and build on it, and the generalist will be able to understand the main gist. That's the whole point of publication. And the last bullet point, because it's something that we have seen in quite a few cases, we have almost a copy of a dissertation submitted as a manuscript to our journal, which includes for sure a lot of information, quite a few graphics and a lot of technical information that could be going either in a separate publication or in an appendix. This is sometimes quite hard to explain to some authors, that it's the publication of a dissertation, that there is a place for that, but not the scientific article. Scientific article is an excerpt of what has been produced So that's the scientific message that we're trying to convey. And I will stop at that. That was my bit. I guess we will take questions at the end, right?
Thank you very much. Thank you. I invite Professor Kalogiru. He will present on ethics in publishing as editor-in-chief of Renewable Energy.
Yeah. Quite a difficult subject, quite a crucial subject, I would say also. So some important, I will start with this, make it a bit short so as to allow afterwards questions. There are important things that you should know. The very first and basic thing is that do not copy parts from other papers or books or whatever. This is called plagiarism, which is a scientifically wrong behavior. It can affect your academic life, it can affect your academic development in general. I know many people that have lost their job because the university doesn't want to have people that are thieves, in a sense. Let's put it that simple way, in their university. So it's very important, and you should be very, very careful. Also, please note that similarity now check as part of the initial screening that all journals are following. So each paper submitted passes through a tool which is called Authenticate and creates a report which comes with the paper when it arrives to the editor to handle. What you need to do, cite properly material taken from other papers. That doesn't mean that you have to take a paper from the first line until the end and, okay, you added another sentence yourself and just cite it and it's okay. This is totally wrong, of course. Cite equations taken from other sources. Of course, this may not apply to standard well-known relations. Also figures, also tables. We see many times nothing copy as a text, but uses a lot of figures from another paper. Even copy-paste. Sometimes it's very obvious that they just copy and paste it. A usual cause of problem is self-plagiarism. I will talk about this towards the end of this presentation. This is usually involves papers presented in conferences. First of all, what plagiarism includes? Actually everything. Not only words, language, ideas, findings, writing, graphic presentations, computer programs maybe, diagrams, illustration, lecture notes, electronic material, and any other original work that is available somewhere. And nowadays the internet is a source of many, many things. However, you need to be very, very careful when you use that material. Similarity check. I will go a little bit into more detail into this because you may create that report, authenticate yourself, or there are other similar tools also to use. So we need to be able to see how we interpret these results, because you have to have in mind that this tool compares your paper with millions of other published papers. Usually single words in bibliography are excluded, or there is an option to say how much words to exclude in sequence. The tool does not compare equation, table, and figures. This is very important to remember. So if you copy-paste equations from other sources, that will not be identified in that report. So have it in mind that because the other people that you have taken the figure from, they will see it afterwards and see that figure is mine. Why is reproducing this paper without any citation, without any measurement to my work? And they ask for measures, and the only measure usually you can take is to retract the paper. And this is very important. The interpretation of the result is assessed the responsibility of the editor, but you as author also, you can produce this report and try to identify whether there is a problem or not. I will give you some examples just to understand. This is one example which you see one of the things that we usually, I think this is the, yeah. You see this figure here, it doesn't show, yeah, 45%. This is the similarity index, the total similarity index. This does not mean sometimes anything. Sometimes it means a lot of things. It depends. What is important is what is copied from a single source. So although this is, I think I have it circled here, yeah. Although this is 45%, the single source, I mean material taken from one particular paper, is only 11%. This is not considered a very big problem. Of course, you have to see whether that 11% is. So you have to go through the, of course we understand I removed some names so as you understand, not to reveal the authors and people that I have taken this information, but you need to search inside the paper and see where this similarity is, and if this is important, then I will show you another example later on, which with a much more less percentage is still problematic. Another case, 62%. This is a problematic case. Why? Because 27% is taken from this source there. 27% is more than a quarter of a paper. So a quarter of a paper is copied from somewhere else. Maybe in that case, there's no need to even to search where is this 25%, 27%, because it's so big, so large, that you don't need to spend more time investigating this where appears in that document or not. So the figure itself gives you a lot of information in this way, in this case. This one is an extreme case, 57%. However, this is not a problematic case, because if you click in that thing there, you realize that this is a PhD of the first author. So he took material from his PhD. Obviously, this is something which can happen because it's your own work. And because some universities publish these PhDs openly, the tool can identify this source and find it in similarity. But, okay, this is, I would say, a legitimate high percentage. Provided it's your PhD, it's not someone else's PhD, of course. Huh? That happens a lot of time. Okay, this is explaining what I just said. This one here, pay attention to this. Total similarity index, 21%. Not a very high figure, I would say, and not a very high figure of a single source. Single source copying 7% only. However, this is a very, very problematic area because case, because this 7% was in the main findings of the project. It means that this guy has done no research by himself, he just copy-paste the findings of somebody else and claiming it at his own work. So even a very small percentage sometimes is ringing a bell because you have to check inside the document where this 7% is, and if you find it that this is in the main results, then it means that he have copied the results from the other source, that it was not his work, the other paper, of course, obviously, of that author. Okay, plagiarism. As I said before, it's a very serious accusation affecting the academic career of the researchers and the academics in general. For this reason, you must be very careful when somebody writes to the editor and says that, okay, I discovered this and that paper is not correct, either has a poor science or some wrong science. That is also a case that we investigate, not only plagiarism. Or this work copies most of my work, and without any citation or any mentioning to my work, we have to investigate. Usually we investigate. This investigation takes a lot of time, usually. However, eventually we have to come to a solution. And the solution in this case was to retract the papers. You see that the thing is maybe it's not very clearly seen on the screen. We have to prepare a retraction note as editor saying why this paper is retracted. And the thing is that's why you have to be very careful. If you open that, it explains you very well why this is retracted. For example, this one plagiarizes previously published material and used confidential data without permission, considering parts of the paper have been taken directly from this Botex Solar. It was one specific case, this one. But the thing is that the paper remains published with this red watermark shown forever. So your life is marked forever as having a retraction on your name. That's why you have to be very, very careful. And as I said at the beginning, many universities doesn't want to have personnel with papers like this appearing on Science Direct or whatever, and they send them away, they send them at home, and they just let them go because they don't like this to happen. It's a bad reputation, not only for the researcher, but also for the university itself. Okay, let's elaborate a little bit more on the problem of self-plagiarism. Usually, as I said from the beginning, applies to papers initially presented in conferences with little or no change that are submitted to journals. This is, okay, maybe you say, okay, what's wrong with it? It's my own work, I publish it twice, one in a conference, one in a journal. Yeah, but this is, and it's not identified by Authenticate unless the proceedings are published in internationally. But reviewers are experts, and usually as experts they participate in some of those conferences, and they can easily find the similarities and start writing letters to the editor and start investigation. And what that investigation would be is to retract the paper. Why you should have such a thing on your life once you can, sorry, I don't know how it moves by itself. Yeah, why you should have, no, sorry, it was the other way around. Yeah, here. You should be very careful, of course, in that case as well. Of course, as we understand, this is not as serious as plagiarism. Copy materials from other people and claim it yours. That's what plagiarism means. But still problematic because the originality is questioned. People will write and say, okay, what is originality in this new publication? And you have to put it in your journal. This is, of course, a very obvious question and very good question, I would say. Avoid reproducibility in the future. Many times people reading papers in the scientific area comes across the similar paper, usually published in different journals, and they ask for measure. So this is, has to do with mostly with double submissions. Nowadays, it's getting worse and worse. There is now a new tool in Sevilla that they identify the double submissions. And from the number of cases we receive, I don't know how many of the already published papers are already appearing in more than one journal. But sometimes, at some stage, people find this. And usually, the people found this is PhD students, that they start the literature review, they check for papers, and they found the two identical papers, and they start writing letters. Why is this allowed to have two similar, exactly similar papers published in two different journals? Of course, we understand that retraction is the only possibility, and usually the one which is published afterwards is, even we play with the dates there, and the one which is published afterwards is retracted. One example is this one here. Don't remember what I put, 56%. Of course, this is 53%. You may say, okay, why is not 100%? And the thing is that it's not 100% because it excludes the titles, the abstracts, the references list sometimes. So it goes down, but it's still a very high percentage, as you understand. Okay. Other areas of ethical problems that appear in the publishing world, I would say, is using inappropriate data. This is one important thing. I have one case that I will report here, a paper using data from a real system from 2010 until 2016. That was the author claiming that. But the system was put in operation in the middle of 2016. So the director of that research center wrote to me and said, how this is possible? Where did he find this data? So it's a manipulated data, of course. It was wrong data. So in that case, there is no other way but to retract that paper because editors doesn't want to have wrong data published in their journal. Authorship problems. Many often it's authors added or subtracted between resubmissions. This is wrong. Be careful not to do it. You may have serious problems. You may not have problems eventually, but it's a very difficult way to pass it through. You need to explain to the editor why the new editor, or the new author is added, or why one is subtracted. And usually you hear silly excuses. And this is something that we don't like as editors. Both publishers and editors are against gift authorship because some professor is pushing you as a student to add his name to that paper, or you do it out of pity, or you do it out of mercy, or you do it because he will help you in the future. You think he will help you in the future. Things like that. I mean, these are ridiculous reasons. And usually there are problems with authorship between relationships between students and supervisors. Not always, but sometimes it happens to have this kind of eternal fights that eventually come to the journals. Another area which is happening, unfortunately, a lot is what we call salami publishing. You did a very good research, but you publish a little bit in every journal so as to have many publications. This is, again, wrong. Basically, it's the same paper published with minor additions, not necessarily with high similarity, because they managed to change the wording and things like tricks like this. And this is, of course, done in an attempt to increase the number of papers. Submissions of papers of the same paper in two different journals. I have said a little bit about that in the previous slide. Have in mind that it's impossible for the tool to identify the similarity, the authenticate tool, because it examines the paper of already published papers. So if you have a double submission, in other words, you send the same paper to two journals twice at the same time, the system will not identify this. Now there is a new tool, as I told you, that this is identified. However, sometimes it may slip the attention of that tool, and when you get both papers accepted and after you get accepted, even if you say, okay, I want to withdraw this paper now because you know yourself that you have already received an acceptance from another journal, but this is not, as long as you get the email of the editor saying that your paper is accepted, is considered as a publication. So even if you want to withdraw it afterwards, it will not be accepted. It will be published. So it is a double submission, which suffers the retraction, of course. Okay, also cases where similarity is low, but most of the tables and figures are the same, copied from other papers. So this is something that you should be very careful, and not just rely on the issue that the tool will not identify this. It means that no problem. It is a problem because the people that you will be copying the material, they will find it sometimes. I think it might be my last slide. Ethical problems related to the review process. Unfortunately, we have this as well. So we, as editors, try to handle this in a very delicate way. And the first and most important thing is that reviewers asking authors to cite their papers. Most of the times, papers are relevant to the paper and the evaluation. You just ask them to add this just to increase, of course, their own impact factor. Sometimes it's very difficult to identify in the review comments, as many tricks are used. For example, the new trick is to use just the title of the paper, but if you Google that title, it gets you directly to the paper. What we do, we usually send a warning letter to such reviewers, and remove the reviewers if the behavior is repeated. This is what we do, and also what I do personally is to remove those papers from the list of comments, and I have a standard note saying that paper cited by the author, because it says on the text that please cite these papers, and I say this note that I remove those as editor, and you may find other suitable papers from the published literature to cite if necessary. Another thing is preparation of discussion paper just to reduce the credit of an author, because you don't like that author and you want to create problems to him, and sending a discussion paper to discuss that this is a wrong thing, wrong theory, wrong results, and asking for measures just to reduce the credit that the other author got already from that paper. Or an attempt to publish even in this way a paper in brackets, because a discussion paper, okay, it's a paper also published with page numbers and things like that. So we are very careful when we receive this kind of material for publication, and we do serious investigations every time to make sure that this is a creditable discussion paper that actually found something wrong and tried to correct it. Okay, thank you. I will answer questions at the end, and probably there are a lot of questions on these issues because it is an important area. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to invite Professor Henrik Lund, Editor-in-Chief of the journal Energy.
Okay, I think I'll, can you hear me? Yeah, I'll start talking while we are preparing the slides. It's okay? Great, good. Now we are many editors here tonight, all telling you what to do and how to do it. And my topic is how to structure the paper. But I think it's also worthwhile just to reflecting a little bit about why we're doing it. Why are we researchers? Why do society need research? What is it we're doing and why are we doing it? And if I should boil that down to just one sentence, it is because we wish society to get wiser. So we wish to become, we wish to know more, we wish to be wiser. Not only the individual scientist, but society as such. And that's why it is important what we do. And that's also why it is important that we communicate what we do among us, but also to society. So when we die, a very wise person, our knowledge will not die with us. It will stay in society and we will keep getting wiser. In my view, that's what it's all about. And before I start telling you how to structure a paper, I think if we know what it's all about, then the structure will give itself, so to speak. And I have a slide here, just you can take a look at that while I'm continuing speaking on why. And this is just how publishing is looked upon from the editor's point of view. As you can see, I stopped counting in 2017. This is the number of submissions being sent to Entity. And it's increasing, and it will likely increase forever. So looked upon for my chair and the rest of us, our chair, we just receive enormous amount of submissions. And basically our job as editors is to, what should we publish here in order for society to get wiser? So what should we look for? And all this about reviewers and authors and editors and what is it all about, and all the advice you get here, and maybe you cannot remember it when you leave the hall. I'll try to boil all this message here down to just one thing. One thing, if you can remember that, then the rest is just trivialities out of just remembering this one thing. I can boil it down to one word. Are you curious? That one word is novelty. It's all about if we have some novelty research to report. So the first thing you should ask yourself before you even send your publication to an editor or to a journal is ask yourself, what is my novelty contribution? It's all about novelty, 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 and the rest is not really important. It's all about if I, as a researcher, when I become an author, have something to tell that will make society wiser. That is what it's all about. So if we understand that and remember that when we leave the room, then the rest is easy. Because then you can understand what we are looking for, all the editors. We are looking for, is there a novelty contribution in this paper here? And personally, I will go a long way if I can see there's really something good novelty here. Okay, it's not well structured. Okay, the language is not good. There's something. But I will go a long way to get that published. On the other hand, if I see something that is very well polished and very well structured, but there's no novelty contribution, what should I do? So this is what it is all about, the novelty contribution. And then, of course, it should be relevant for an international audience, relevant for society, and so on and so forth. But what is the novelty contribution? And when then I'm supposed to say something in this context about how to structure the paper, well, it's all about the novelty contribution. I mean, if you ask, and of course communicating what the novelty contribution is, if you ask journalists, and if journalists sometimes know how people read papers, newspapers, journalist knows that people reading newspapers, they look at the title. If you're lucky, they read the first 10 lines. Next, after the title, they look at the picture, and they look at the subtitle of the picture, and that's it. And if you haven't communicated what you wish to say in that few seconds people look at your newspaper, then forget about it. So all journalists, they know that you should capture the most important thing and put it in the title. If they're really good, they even identify the most important word and put that first. And then they have this, and then they have that, and they know that the longer you go down in that paper, it's not really important, and people will likely not read it. So, and I was once I said to colleague I had who was very much into journalist writing and told me all this. I said, yes, but we are scientists. We do it another way around. And then he pointed his finger at me and he said, that's where you are wrong, Henrik. Communication is the same no matter if you're a scientist or not. You can be as accurate as you wish to be as a scientist and still be good to communicate what you wish to communicate. So when it comes to the title and the abstract, and you have done your work asking yourself, what is my knowledge contribution? Then you should tell that in the abstract. It should be the first thing you tell. This is what I'm researching about. This is my knowledge contribution. This is my result. This is what I have to contribute to make the world wiser. And if you are good, then you capture the essence of this and put it into the title. And if you really want to compete with a journalist, then you look at the title that is very often long, see if you can make it shorter, and then you identify in the title what is the most important word, and then you put that first, and then you restructure. Then you have really strong communication of what your knowledge contribution is. Then the rest also gives itself. The introduction. Think about the knowledge contribution. What should you have in the introduction? You should describe what all the rest of people already did before, so you can argue why what you have here is novelty. So you can tell what your novelty contribution is. That's the introduction. Then you have the theory, the methodology, and the analysis, and the results, and so on. And when you come to the conclusion, what should you tell? Yeah, that's right. Very good, very good. That's what it's all about. So, and very often you see people starting out with an introduction. This is what I'm going to investigate. Then you look at the conclusion. Did they conclude on what they said in the beginning? No, they did not. Sometimes they conclude something you could have told yourself before you even started writing the paper. Very often the case. But if you have started asking yourself, what is my knowledge contribution? Then you can also be sure that you conclude on that when you come to the conclusion. So when you leave, you only have to remember one thing, and that is to ask yourself, what is my novelty contribution? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, the last speaker is Professor Natasha Markowska. She will talk about what reviewers are looking for in papers and how to respond to reviewers' comments.
Thank you, Dana. I think I have a difficult task to cover because the issues, a lot of issues I'm going to present now are somehow already covered by the previous speakers, but still I think it's worth to repeat them as the repetition is a matter of knowledge. You gave me two tasks practically to look at the submitted paper through the lens of a reviewer, meaning that we need to understand what does the reviewer look for when he needs to write his reviewer's report. And of course, not all reviewers are of high quality, but the high quality reviewer report would need to elaborate on many issues, but all of them can be grouped along three different lines. Novelty, 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 many times mentioned again today, then it's also, it has to elaborate on the rigor of the paper, and last but not least, definitely the style of the paper. And let us go one by one. Novelty, then understood as the level of advancement of theory or of conceptual designs, or maybe some methodological techniques. Then rigor also as a capacity of the paper to meticulously execute some relevant or appropriate research design. And style, it's about good writing or capacity of the paper to make a compelling case of the research work. About the novelty, the research question should address a real gap in the literature, meaning that the authors should really undertake a very deep literature review to understand what is the gap and to pose it as a research question which will be answered in their contribution. Then the authors should also ask whether this research question is actually worth asking. Meaning that, for example, it should solve some societal problem, or saying in simple words, some research funding should have this kind of research among its priorities for financing. So somebody, the societies, should be interested to have the answers of that research question. This connects also to the request for the research to be relevant, helping to solve some problems, and also timely. Not to, we have burning problems, and our research and science should be dedicated to resolve these problems now. And they should be based on current data and not to try to resolve something from the past. Also, the results should be generalizable and not maybe to stick on one case, but the cases should be used only to test the hypothesis. And many times mentioned, the state of the art in the area should be advanced, either through generation of new knowledge, either through devising new methods, or improving the existing ones. And last but not least, in order to demonstrate novelty, the research should convincingly demonstrate an importance for the science, and also practical importance of the obtained results. About the rigor, again, we come back to the current state of knowledge. The research should be designed, and its scope should be tied to and built on the current state of the knowledge in the area. Meaning, again, that the authors should conduct very in-depth literature review in order to be able to connect their research to the state of the art and contribute to the state of the art. The methods applied should meet the common standards of rigorousness, or should be simply scientific methods, not just simple surveys and counting the answers, for example. Also, the methods should be adequately selected in order to be capable to answer the research question. So we have to select very adequate methods to do the research. And when it comes to the analysis, the course of work should follow ongoing norms and standards for the category of that methods. And at the end, the authors should ask themselves whether the analysis performed do the job in actually answering the questions. Do the findings of their analysis will help to answer the questions, the research question. And finally, the discussion points should be clearly connected to the findings. We often come across some conclusions and discussions when the authors include very general conclusions, but they cannot clearly connect it to the work conducted under the research. And the third element, the style, it was explained how the title should look like, but let me just repeat. It should be descriptive, direct, accurate, appropriate, interesting also, concise, precise, unique, and most importantly, should not be misleading. So what has been done should be clearly reflected in the title. Highlights are also important in order to your paper to be classified in some of the research topics. But they have to clearly capture the novel results, novelty of the research, or also if some new methods were used during the study. So this is also very important, the highlights to be clear and clearly reflect the novelty from the paper. Abstracts also, it should be actually your paper, it should reflect everything from your paper. Maybe one sentence, but it should, for each of the elements like context and background, motivation, hypothesis, methods, and results and conclusions, but it is important that all these elements are included in the abstracts, particularly the results and novelty. The paper should follow that IMRATE structure, introduction, methodology, methods, research and discussion, and particularly for methodology section, it is very important that only methods are clearly described in this section. It should be completely case-free. The case which is used to conduct the analysis should be explained under results section. This is also important, particularly for methodological papers, when we need to make comparison between and clearly see the advancement, the methodological advancement of the paper. And of course, at the end, the language is clear, conclusive, and unequivocal. Ideas should be transmitted as economically, not many words to be used. Also, not too many emotions to be put in the papers, and ambiguity should be reduced to the minimum possible level. And the second task of mine is given by our moderator was to reflect a little bit on how to respond to the reviewers' comments. So this is in the phase when you paper passed through the first phase of revision and you got the reviewers' comments. It is important to know that it is not only to revise your paper and provide a revised manuscript. But you should also carefully prepare a cover letter and other reviewer response documents where you will clearly explain what has been done regarding the revision. Be aware that, okay, it is the glory of publishing the paper goes with the author, and the editor and the reviewers are only largely volunteers who just are here to evaluate your paper. So try to make their life easy and try to present the response which is easy to follow and easy to read. The response should be systematic, meaning that all the points made by reviewers should be clearly addressed, and it should be complete, meaning that each point by point comment should be included in your response. Of course, there might be some cases of disagreement with the reviewer's comments, but still, even in that case, you should apply courteous tone and understand that in most cases, the critique of the reviewers is just to help you to improve your paper. Also, your response should be defended with evidence, be it through some expert pointing to some areas in your paper, or maybe some statements from the other reviewers, or maybe some citations from other papers. But again, your response should be defended very clearly with evidence and should elucidate comprehensively how the criticism was addressed. And my last point is that if you are given a chance to revise your paper, just take it. Don't put off your response and do the revision immediately. So it's not the innovation in the research area, it's not only about good ideas, but it is also about working hard to push that idea through the reviewing process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The floor is open for discussion, for comments, for questions. Yes, I see a first question.
Thank you for the nice presentation. I have 3 questions. The first one is regarding the issue of gift authorship. Where is the border if I am a supervisor and my student is publishing a paper? The second issue is the novelty in review papers. How can we say are the major features of a good review paper? And third, it was by Natasha, the issue of hypothesis. So I understand hypothesis in analyzing statistical work, but I would say in most technical papers we do not set up hypotheses, but we set up some research questions which are not to be answered by a hypothesis.
The first, I think, is for me, but I'm not sure I understand it. You mean that your student publish a paper without involving you? Sorry.
No, I'm involved in the work of my students. I read the paper, I check it, and so the issue of gift authorship is not fully clear for me. Where is the border? Is the border if somebody is just on the paper without contributing anything, or just a little, and today we have to clarify for publications who did what?
Okay, for us, all names that appear on a paper, of course, there is now a need to supply an ethical statement, or they call it something? Credit statement, sorry, which means that which author did what. It's a must now to be associated, to be submitted together with the paper. So we know that the first author was the main researcher, the other is the supervisor, the other is somebody that helped in that area, things like that. But we cannot control eventually as editors who are appearing, which names are appearing. The question is that when you receive a paper with, let's say, 25 authors, what can possibly all those names could have done on that paper? It's, you start thinking and creates some worries that maybe a lot of those names are what we call gift authorship. So we put that names there just for some reason. But the main issues is mainly adding and subtracting names within the resubmission process, or even when the paper is accepted, asking to add or move some of the authors. This is wrong.
Can I take this?
Yes.
That's all right. Take this. So if I may just add to what Professor Karologirou said about the gift authorship, the credit statement also includes the funding acquisition and the research management, which covers the supervision of research. So the supervisor of a team has clearly been there for longer. Some of the ideas have originated from that supervisor. There's every right for the supervisor to be on the author's list, of course, covered by those criteria, the funding acquisition, the research management, of course, the manuscript reading. So coming to your second question, I tried to be brief in my presentation, so I didn't elaborate too much, but I did refer to the critique in a review paper. And critique means that we are, as authors of a review paper, we are offering unbiased, ideally speaking, advice or unbiased opinion on that range of technologies or systems or techniques that are being reported. So it's a comparison. But if I just catalog the technologies, then I'm adding zero value. If I add the technologies and then offer scientific opinion based on those metrics, based on those comparison criteria, how those technologies compare against each other, that's the value of a review paper. I'll leave the third question.
And also, I can add just a sentence on this. A good idea is to have a final statement showing the perspective. Now that you have seen all those papers and you review and show all this critical analysis that my colleague just said, say where the technology is moving in the next 5 or 10 years. That would be a very good additional thing on a review paper. Of course, novelty by itself is not possible to be there because you're just reviewing the works of others. Yes. Natasha, maybe? The third question.
Yes, and the third question was about the hypothesis and research question. I think it's very much dependent on the area. In some areas, you mentioned technical areas and technical papers. Of course, we are able to establish hypotheses and test it through. But maybe for social sciences and other disciplines, we call it research questions. But in fact, this is the same thing. The most important thing is to have either hypothesis or research question clearly stipulated, and then go. If it is hypothesis, you will confirm it or not, or reject it, and the research question, you will answer it. But in fact, it depends on the type of the discipline where the paper is.
I would like to pick up where Natasha finished, and this is really an important issue. And I would like to link it to what Henrik was actually saying. When you publish something, you want to deliver a message. Okay? So this is very important, whether you call it hypothesis or research questions, it has to be there. Because readers should really know what you are doing. And then after the what, it comes the how, and the model, and procedure, and so on. This is one thing. Another thing, maybe if Soteris can comment a little bit. I can comment from viewpoint of an editor, but we are making the panel more for the sake of the author. So what happens when an author gets a request from a reviewer? I want you to cite this and this and this and this. It's very important. We know what to do as editors, but for authors it's important to know what they should do.
Which starts with the first or I just comment on the last one. Okay, this, as I said, is very problematic, and sometimes it's done in a very mafia way, I would say, in the sense that they hide it behind words, and you have to read very, very carefully their comments in order to understand that what he's mentioning there is asking the author, in fact, to cite that word. And sometimes they do it meticulously in such a way that is not very easy to understand, but when, of course, the author goes through each point very, very carefully, they will identify that. As I said, what I do, I remove those things when I notice them and put that note that I said, and also create some problems. In this. I write to my reviewers saying that this is wrong behavior, is unethical. You cannot inflate your own impact factor in this way. It's wrong. If you have one or two papers that are very, very related to that work, it's obvious that you need to ask the author to compliment on that, but not asking for 10 papers, and half of them are completely irrelevant. And also, there is another thing. In that way, if all the 10 papers, or even 3/4 papers, are from the same author, then you reveal your identity to the author, which is a second major problem, because we are talking about blind review process. In other words, the author doesn't know who the reviewer is. So it's a problematic case in any case. And I will definitely be very careful when I receive the comment back from the reviewers, not to penalize, from the authors, not to penalize the authors because they haven't cited those papers, which in anyhow they don't know because I removed them. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. If I may add to that, in response to your question about the authors, from the author's perspective, in those cases, I have been able to communicate with authors directly, whether they're in my research circle or grouping. Then the advice is that they have every right to contact the editor, report such behavior, and in fact, in their rebuttal, they can state that we are not citing these papers because there is no serious justification behind it. As Suderit has mentioned, if there is a request for 10, even 15 papers, and the sentence before that is, these papers should be cited, that's zero justification. And therefore, that's strong grounds for the authors to come back and say, we do not, but if they inform the editor, then it's a much more coordinated effort.
And sometimes, may I add something? And sometimes the way you ask, for example, if you say that, okay, you may consider these papers which may add value to your paper, this possibly is better. But if you instruct them, you should cite these papers, otherwise your paper cannot be accepted. Of course, this is not accepted as a comment, because you order the author to do it.
So, as Prof has mentioned in one of the slides, suppose if there is some internal conflict between the supervisor and the student, so what should be the stand of the student and how the committee takes it into the perspective for publishing any manuscripts?
You understand this is very, very difficult. We cannot interfere into such problems because we will never finish. we need to start writing letters to the directors, the vice directors, and the head of department to sort out the difficult. This is not our job, of course.
So how should a student take this forward?
There must be rules within your university, if by any means that
I'm
happens.
just asking a general question. It generally happens, and you have mentioned it very clearly in the presentation.
I'm not sure I understand you.
Actually, I'm just asking this question out of curiosity, because it may happen with people.
Yeah, it may happen, yes. We face from time to time such cases, but usually we tell to the student, go to your university, there must be certain procedures to report that thing, that wrong behavior of your supervisor. We have in our university regulators how to deal with this. I'm sure in your university, or in all decent universities, there must be similar rules. Because it's usual, it's relations of human beings, and eventually, and if you are with the same person 3, 4, 5, maybe more years to do a PhD, at some stage maybe these relations break and have problems.
Yeah.
It can happen. We are human beings, we are different from one from each other. So it can happen. So, but we cannot interfere into this. I mean, if you are asking the editor to start taking measures, we cannot.
Okay, not a problem. Thank you.
And we will never finish doing any paper if we do this.
Thank you very much. Well, my question is about novelty, since the huge part of discussion was about novelty, and I'd like to just express it with an example. So if we assume a research topic as a land that as a student or a researcher, my job is to fill the gaps or fill the holes in the land. And sometimes I think or I feel that I'm adding more lands to this land. So in my eyes, this thing is quite novel to me, and I think it's worthwhile publishing it and let the other part of the world know about it. But maybe in the editor's opinion, this thing is not novel. But the question is, how do you define the exact edge of novelty as something is novel and something is not novel? Thank you.
So basically you're asking what is novelty and who is to decide what is novelty and what is not novelty. The answer is no, we don't know how to do that.
Yes, exactly.
So the best you can do as an author is to argue why your contribution is novelty. And then you have to convince the reviewers and the publisher, and by the end of the day, the readers. And there can be differences in the assessment of if this is really novelty, worth publishing, relevant, and so on, or not. So that's what the whole game is about. So the only good thing I can say about it is that luck-wise we have more than one journal. So if you can't convince one, maybe you can convince another. But by the end of the day, this is an assessment. There's no right and wrong to this.
Thank you.
I may just to it has been mentioned, but in terms of the argument that Henrik just mentioned, as we said, the position of the research in the international community is what will then warrant whether it's novel or not. So if you're describing work that you consider to be novel and you're citing the relevant literature, and indeed by that action it's still novel, then that is novel by definition. But if there's already literature which is reporting on the concept, on the idea, and this is adding to that dimension, then the novelty factor, of course, goes down. So the position within the international community using the literature is a very good mechanism of arguing your case.
Can I add something also? Because it's a very, very crucial thing, the novelty. And of course, your main responsibility is to mention very clearly what you consider as novel. And of course, this will be judged by the reviewers and by the editor also. So my suggestion is that you do the introduction, you introduce your research question, you do the literature review, then the last paragraph of introduction must be, okay, after reading all those papers that you have shown in this analysis, what is that is your work differs from that, what is new that you offer? And we look for that usually at that particular place, the last paragraph in introduction. Very, very important. And also, of course, in title, in abstracts as well. And okay, moving a little bit out of your question, then I want to complete that. What Henrik said before, that you need to see it from a newspaper way of reading articles. The same applies here in the journal, because when we invite reviewers, what we give them is the title and the abstract. So if the title and the abstract is not very well written, doesn't show this novelty, nobody will accept to. And you start asking reviewers, they all decline, and after a number of months, we have to stop doing that and send an email to the author, sorry, we cannot find reviewers to evaluate your work. But it's very important that the title and the abstract is very important, because also afterwards, when the paper is published, if it was eventually accepted, the readers in Science Direct and Scopus, you know that they receive also the title and the abstract. So from there, somebody will decide whether it's good for him to download it and read the whole paper. So these two pieces are very, very important. Title, abstract, and the last paragraph in introduction. To say at least what you believe is novel. Maybe the reviewers disagree, but that's the sense of peer review process. Your peers, in other words, other people that are experts on that area as well, they will judge whether this is really novel or not.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I'd like to thank you all again for your presentations. Your insights have been very valuable. I had a question to kind of go back to the review elements. My question is, I'd just like to hear your perspectives on open review, so disclosing reviewer comments and maybe even reviewer identities with the final publication, and if you think that that would improve ethics in reviewing and potentially reduce the amount of maybe lower quality reviews.
So thank you for your question. It's something that we have seen from other publishers that they are practicing. And as a reviewer, now removing the editor's hat and wearing the reviewer's hat, it is quite important to be able to stand by the decision. And so if I was to be honest with you, whether it's a blind review or an open review, the comments should not change. If this is an unbiased review of the quality of the work and the scientific value, it should not change. The fact that some other publishers are, because of this practice, they publish the names of the reviewers, that perhaps, if it's a published paper, that could perhaps lead to other building relationships because it's an accepted manuscript, so the reviewers have helped that manuscript improve its quality and be published. That could be a good thing. But in terms of the review process per se, it should not affect the rigor and the thoroughness.
And also we have exactly the opposite, the double review process, the double blind review process, that not even the reviewers know who the author is. So it's exactly the other side. Yes.
No, if I may add something, that the reviewer, they review your paper for free, and so if we need to add their names on the paper, something that should change, because they put the effort and they devoted the effort and time for free. And regarding the blind review, there is also some problem, because when you review a paper, because we are all reviewers too, you can easily find the name of the authors, because you check reference in the paper, you can check what the novelty of the paper, so it's easy to find out the name of the authors. So this is a very tricky problem.
Thank you for the inspiring presentations, and I would like to ask you, as editors and reviewers, because I encountered as a reviewer sometimes the manuscript of 4 pages of text with 5 pages of reference list. So as reviewers and editors, how you react on this? If you react? And the second connected question is there any sweet spot of number of references in the non-review articles, of course? Thank you.
Very general, okay. I understand the case. Some papers, it depends on the subject. Some papers are very well presented in the literature, and maybe you need a lot of references to show exactly where you are and what is the difference, or to base your new findings on that. So it's paper specific, I would say, and not, but okay, many reviewers in that case, because occasionally you have such cases, they question the author. Do you really need all those references? I mean, if you have 7, 8 references just for the same piece of information, maybe you need also only to mention the originator and not all the others, that they just follow up their words. It's a serious problem sometimes, but usually not so much.
If I may add something, sometimes this is highlights a problem that we have, the citation problem. So there are many papers that are submitted with a high number of recitation, because sometimes they expect to receive back the citation from the reviewers, I mean, for the cited paper, to the authors of the cited paper. So this is also a problem. So we don't know as editor how to deal with it, because it's very difficult. But it's something that we have to keep in mind. So sometimes they cite papers to receive citation.
If I should answer this, I would say that you cannot say that necessarily there's too many or too little references, and exactly how many should there be, 50 or only 30 of this. I will repeat myself. It all boils down to what is the knowledge contribution of the paper. I mean, the purpose of citing is to argue what the knowledge contribution is. And sometimes you are in a field where you need to cite a lot in order to make that statement. And sometimes you can only need to cite a little. And it depends on the knowledge of contribution, it depends on the context of this knowledge, and it also depends a little bit on the context of the scope of the journal where you are making the argument. So in my opinion, it can be long, it can be short. Then for practical reasons, we don't wish to have it too long, because then the papers will get so extremely long, and then it ends up being more like a review paper than it's actually a research paper. But that's more for practical reason. It's not because it will be bad science to do it or anything like that. So again, you have to ask yourself, what is my knowledge of contribution? How many references do I need in order to make that argument in a relevant and good way? That's my answer.
Can I answer this? Okay, I think that this problem addressed seen from the reviewer perspective. If a reviewer notices that there are too many references and not really connected to the content, I think he has to make a clear comment in his review that this is the case, and the author should check again, and but of course to provide evidence for this statement with example, this reference or that reference, and to ask reviewer, the author, to check. And also, it could be this kind of requests for referencing in the reviewer's report. And again, the authors are those who, in their response to review, should note this, that maybe some references are suggested but not very relevant, and this should be also made clear in the response to reviewers. So this information should be clearly made visible to editor, who is at the end making decision. But it would be helpful for the quality of the paper from both sides, this kind of cases to be clearly reported, either by reviewers or either by our authors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So there is a conclusion that there is no minimum and maximum size. It depends on the context and, of course, of the novelty. Thank you.
Just to, everything has been said absolutely 100% correct. The only thing that perhaps to add is if the authors are increasing the number of references by their own papers, and where they could have perhaps cited one paper, they cite a lot more than one, then that is a clear reason for reducing the number of references. And that's a reviewer's and an editor's job to do that.